Morning, everyone. We would like to welcome our speakers, our panelists, our participants. As of last night, I saw a little over 200 registrations for this virtual town hall discussion. Hopefully, they can all join us this morning. In StratBase, ADR Institute, with our partner Democracy Watch, we have tracked since the election of May 2022 what we call 8 geopolitical risks. We continue to face the challenge of generational inequality, the continuing public health crisis that has its own social, economic consequences. As we have seen our lives digitally transformed, we are now challenged with digital divide. Economically, we're still in what we call in StratBase a long emergency. How do we revitalize our consumer economy and spur investment-driven growth? What about external to us? The future of trade. Are there supply chain opportunities? How can we pursue an export-oriented sustained growth trajectory? On one hand, as we economically recover, we know that we are also in a climate emergency. The need for a green economic recovery program should define the future of the Philippine Republic. Externally, we remain to be in a regional area where there seems to be asymmetric security challenges. How do we advance a rules-based international order in a multipolar world, not being brought into the strategic competition between China and the United States? But at the core of any discussion of governance is corruption and bad governance. We believe in our institute that these are key deterrent to generating investment and the creation of an enabling business environment for economic recovery in the Philippines. We have seen that the new government under President Marcos Jr. faces this tremendous task of addressing the lingering issues brought about the COVID pandemic. Now, this year, external risk threatens our country's growth. When you hear words of social inequality, poverty, unemployment, inflation, corruption, digital gap, climate change, traditional security risk, these are issues and concerns that the country's new leaders, the cabinet that supports the president, are expected to solve. They're daunting. When you look at the first 2 quarter numbers economically, we see some positive growth. But is this driven by election spending, election activities? Where are we quarter 3? Where are we quarter 4? Where are we in 2023? We continue to be challenged by unemployment that drives consumption, but more so underemployment. When you see 7 million Filipinos underemployed, I see them as a challenge, as a risk to sustaining growth in our country. We need to deal with these concerns of the Filipino people. Of course, the Marcos administration, the day after the SONA, came up with an 8-point socio-economic agenda. Speaks of a robust economy, inclusive and resilient society. And I took note of their desire in the medium term to create more jobs, create quality jobs, create green jobs. And we can expect by the end of the year, they will come up through the National Economic Development Authority, the Philippine Development Plan, a 5-year program from 2023 to 2028. great initiatives, great ideas, supported by a 2023 budget that is tailor-fit, as they would say, to achieve the 8-point socioeconomic agenda. The challenge is, how do they execute? There's a roadmap, there are plans, there are policy pronouncements. So I would argue that the policy choices of the Marcos presidency and administration for the next 3 months as we end the year and the following 5.5 years of their administration will serve as a litmus test for more than 31 million Filipinos who gave the electoral mandate to President Marcos Jr. We need good policy choices. We need accountability at the core of governance and in the implementation of public policies as pronounced by different cabinet secretaries. Perhaps it's too much to ask from the president, his cabinet, his government in the first 3 months, as they have laid out a good direction for the country in terms of goals and legislative priorities. But it would not be too much to demand accountability for their promises, for what have not been done, and for the succeeding policy choices and decisions we expect them to make. Today, in our institute, we remain optimistic on the plans and programs of the Marcos administration. But we also remain cautious for the sake of all the sectors, stakeholders, and citizens for our country's sustained development. Again, good morning. Welcome to our virtual town hall discussion, an assessment of the President's first 100 days in office. Allow me to pass this on to my colleague, Dr. Magno, who will moderate our discussion.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Dindo. So let us proceed with our first speaker. He is the current president of Pulse Asia Incorporated and is a full professor at the Department of Political Science and Development Studies of De La Salle University, where he handles courses on research methodology, comparative politics, and Philippine politics. He was head of the CHED Technical Panel in Political Science for several years. His fields of expertise are leadership and administration, political and policy research, and facilitation. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Dr. Ronnie Holmes, who will speak on assessing the first 100 days of the Marcos Jr. administration, a presentation of the third quarter survey results of Pulse Asia. Ronnie?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Magno. I hope the slides are shown.
Yes.
Are they? I mean, at least the cover slide. So thanks to StratBase, the Alfred De Rosario Institute, for this invitation. Let me begin by saying that this presentation actually combines a discussion of some survey data alongside my own assessment of the key concerns given the dynamics within the first 100 days of the Marcos administration. And this is the reason for the title of to a fill-in-the-blank start. It's hard really to assess the first 100 days. We know that this benchmark traces back to the early 1930s under the administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he urged the US Congress to pass, I think, more than a dozen measures in order to address the financial crisis that the United States was faced with at that time. A little bit later, I'll also point out that the same concern has been raised, more specifically in a recent activity involving the president and members of Congress, including representatives of the private sector. So it's rather unfair to say that the first 100 days would determine or would even indicate to a limited extent, even to a limited extent, what will happen in the remaining 2,100 days of the Marcos administration. We do hope that for the sake of the nation and our compatriots, that in the coming days, the administration will buckle down to work even more and ensuring that the benefits of economic growth will be felt more strongly by many Filipinos, and that they would strengthen rather than erode our democratic institutions and virtues. Let me begin with a few survey data. Recall that in our June 2022 survey, we asked Filipinos what their expectations of the priority issue that the president-elect at the time, Ferdinand Marcos, should address. Across all areas, the priority was clear. We were faced with a crisis that is essentially caused by exogenous factors, and that priority issue is to control the increasing prices of commodities and services. This was followed by the creation of jobs and livelihood programs, addressing issues confronted by the agricultural sector, increasing the pay of workers, and reducing poverty. What's noteworthy in here is that somehow the president's signaling has also influenced the priority issue that the public thinks that his administration should focus on. Remember that in the inaugural address, and eventually he assumed the portfolio for the Department of Agriculture, the president gave importance towards addressing concerns facing or that have been faced longitudinally by the agriculture sector. These are the same concerns that were reflected in the September 2022 Pulse Asia Ulat ng Bayan survey. We saw an exponential increase in terms of the proportion of the public that felt that among the issues that were listed here, that the primary issue that should be immediately addressed by the national administration will be the increasing prices of goods and services, or inflation. I did not include in the slides when we asked the question whether Filipinos experience paying for goods and services that they normally procure in the past 3 months, whether there was an increase. Everyone basically said that there was an increase in terms of cost, and the primary increase was found in terms of food items. So what we see here among the most urgent concerns are essentially the same concerns that were raised as priority issues in the June 2022 survey: controlling inflation, increasing pay, creating jobs, and reducing the poverty. Fundamental issues that were not given as much attention during the campaign, as the president essentially promised a unity and the general promise of economic recovery. Of these 11 concerns, on these concerns, we asked Filipinos whether they approve or disapprove of the administration's performance in addressing some of these concerns. And this is seen in the chart. The top 5 issues are put in a box here with regard to 2 of those 5 issues, which is controlling inflation and reducing the poverty of many Filipinos. The administration gets less than majority approval. On controlling inflation, the approval is at 31%, 27% are undecided, and the plurality of Filipinos are disapproving of the administration's performance in addressing this issue. On reduction of poverty, we see that Filipinos are essentially divided. Although the plurality will be approving at 39%, the level of indecision is expressed by about a third of the population, and about 1 out of 4 Filipinos are disapproving. Fortunately for the administration, they obtained majority approval on the 3 other top 5 issues. These are fighting graft and corruption with 58% approval, increasing the pay of workers at 59%, and the creation of more jobs at 59%. However, relative to the last performance rating of the national administration that was registered in the June survey, this is the last rating of the performance of the Duterte administration, one will see marginal and significant changes in the assessment of the performance of the prior and the current administration. On the creation of jobs, the administration got a 7 percentage point increase, as you can see with the green arrow, in terms of approval. On reducing poverty, however, the administration saw a 6 percentage point reduction in disapproval. On 3 of the top 5 issues, these are increasing the pay of workers, fighting corruption, and controlling inflation, the performance rating remains unchanged. What can be noted here, however, is that the approval ratings decline significantly on other concerns, which are controlling the spread of COVID, promoting peace in the country, protecting the welfare of overseas Filipino workers, fighting criminality, and enforcing the law on all, whether influential or ordinary people. These ratings can be compared to those received by 2 preceding administrations at the earlier part of their term. As is shown in this chart, one can see of the 9 concerns that we performance rated, the Benigno Aquino III administration at the start of about 3 months after they started their term, they registered majority approval in 7 of the 9 concerns. Though the approval here are lower than those posted in the first performance rating of the Marcos Jr. administration. That's why I put it in a red box. All of these approval ratings, despite being majority approval, are all lower than those that were posted by the Marcos Jr. administration in our September survey. On the other hand, while the performance rating for reducing poverty and controlling inflation of the Aquino administration at the start were lower than the majority, these were still higher than the performance ratings registered by the Marcos administration, Marcos Jr. administration in the September 2022 survey. Of course, we have to provide the context. I think in 2010, the inflation rate was less than 4%. In 2022, I think if I'm not mistaken, our inflation rate, the last one that was posted, was close to 7%. As regards to the Duterte administration, one would see that the majority approval was obtained on all of the 12 issues that we performance rated the administration at the beginning of their term. This was a few months after they started their term. And all of those approval ratings are higher than those recorded by both the Aquino administration and the Marcos Jr. administration. One could say that this is an effect of what is referred to as the honeymoon period. And whether this will change subsequently, more specifically for the Marcos Jr. administration, will depend on what it would do with respect to confronting discontinuing issues. In his own words, in the Manila Overseas Press Club's President Night last October 5, Marcos Jr. stated that he thinks what he has managed to do in the first 100 days is to put together a government which is functional and which has a very, very good idea of what they are targeting in terms of strict economic targets. I will leave this to the next speaker to assess. But let me just say, to a certain extent, the administration has indeed done much in the last 100 days. And there are certain indicators of what Marcos Jr. refers to as a functional government. First, he constituted the cabinet and he had regular meetings with the cabinet. Either the entire cabinet, I think there were 11 cabinet meetings already held in the past 3 months, or with clusters. He met, for example, with the economic team several times in July. He met with his Department of Agriculture team twice also in July. He met with people in charge of COVID prevention twice in July and once in August. And then he basically also tried to attend to concerns regarding energy and the environment in meetings with cabinet officials in charge of this area also in July. What's clear in these cabinet meetings was that there was more attention in the earlier part of his administration. This was in the month of July. So this was probably for him to get acquainted with the concerns in each of the areas and to get inputs from at least his economic team. As he said in his MOPC response, he believes that they have very clear targets with regard to the country's economy. On the other hand, additionally, Bongbong Marcos has had 3 official visits, the first to Indonesia, and then after that to Singapore. In Indonesia, he met with President Jokowi, and he met with business leaders and the Filipino community. In the same manner, in Singapore, he met with Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, the business community in Singapore, as well as the Filipino community. He went to the United States to deliver an address before the UN General Assembly and met with leaders, including the Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Tony Blair, Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida, leaders of the World Bank, the New York Stock Exchange, Asia Society, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and the U.S. President, Joe Biden. Additionally, in last mid-September, he inaugurated the reconstituted Bangsamoro Transition Authority, which remains to be headed by the former MILF Vice Chair, Ahoud Al-Haraj Ibrahim. The reconstituted BTA is composed of 41 officers from the MILF and 39 that were nominated by the government of the Philippines, representatives of the MNLF, and recommendations from the local government units and other sectors. Being a new president, it is clear that he went down to work immediately in terms of working on the proposed budget, and they submitted the proposed budget within the prescribed period, which is a month after delivering the State of the Nation address. It was submitted on August 22, and it was approved by the House on September 23, and the House voted with 289 for and 3 against the more than almost 5.3 billion proposed national budget for 2023. Finally, he convened the Legislative Executive Development Advisory Council just recently, if I'm not mistaken, after the first 100 days, to discuss 32 priority measures, 2 of which have already been passed. But there are 30 measures that have been identified in the LEDAC meeting. This would basically show to us the extent by which the president and members of the legislature are intent in terms of pursuing the reforms. Some of these priority measures include the government right-sizing program, the budget modernization bill, the government financial institutions unified initiative to distress enterprises for economic recovery, what used to be ARISE, and a number of other items, including amendments to the EPIRA law and the Build, Operate, and Transfer law. Clearly, the president got to work, and many of the members of the cabinet have also worked independently based on the directions given by the president. Despite this functioning, however, the strengthening of the institutions, there are key areas of concern with respect to the remaining 2,100 days of the Marcos Jr. administration. And let me just identify a few. The first one is on the extent of horizontal accountability. Over the last administrations, I'm not just referring to the immediate preceding administration, but over across several administrations, we have seen a continuous erosion of horizontal accountability, or the extent by which the branches of government, specifically the legislature, exercises oversight over executive action, and whether the judiciary is able to restrain also executive action, so that the executive can fulfill its mandate and ensure that there is no abuse of power. And on the other hand, we also see a problem of disinformation, which has an effect on citizen engagement and polarization. And the last one would be with respect to the protection of basic freedoms. And we know that these freedoms are essential in terms of combating disinformation, expanding knowledge about public affairs, and also having the people eventually hold with greater substance the government accountable for its failures in addressing many of the issues that it raised that the administration should address. Maraming salamat po. I end the presentation here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ronnie Holmes, for providing us with the perception of Filipinos regarding the Marcos Jr. administration, and providing us also with the context of what you call the functional, or what the president mentioned as the functional government. I'm sure there would be many questions later. So let me now introduce our next speaker. He is an economist and the current president of the Foundation for Economic Freedom, a public advocacy organization focused on advancing the cause of good governance and political liberty. He is also the founder and president of MRM Studios and Mobile Mo Incorporated. A renowned author at this field, he regularly writes articles regarding economic reforms and policies in Philippine newspapers like Business World and Rappler. So to speak on an economic perspective of the first 100 days of the Marcos Jr. administration, let us all welcome Mr. Calixto Toti Siquianco.
Thank you, Dr. Magno. Initially, I was reluctant to accept the invitation of Dindo because I thought that 100 days may be too short to give a fair verdict about the performance of our new president. However, I did accept the challenge, and I hope that I will be able to give a fair assessment of the first 100 days, and hopefully that would be an indication of the future. Thank you. So we move on to, so this is the outline. I will give the good news, the waiting for good news, and of course, what I thought would be missed opportunities and the conclusion. So what are the 6 C's of good news in the first 100 days? So, well, the good news is that President Bongbong Marcos has appointed a competent, professional, experienced cabinet. We have excellent and experienced economic team. You know, you have Ben Jokno has made the rounds as a budget secretary, central bank governor, and of course, he was a former professor. Same thing with Philip Medalla and Arsenio Balisacan. So he has made inspired appointments in the Department of Energy with Attorney Rafael Popo Lutilla. I think he's certainly doing a good job there. At the same time, he has appointed technocrats in other departments, such as Department of Transportation, Department of Public Works, the DOLE, and the DNR. Well, of course, part of the problem, however, is that President Marcos Jr. has been very slow in filling up some critical positions like the Department of Health. And I think his assumption of the agriculture portfolio may have been a mistake because, you know, we are facing a food crisis and he has not, he may not have the time, focus, attention to address this food crisis that we have. At the moment, he only has a senior undersecretary there filling up for him. So I think we should be heartened by the fact that President Bongbong Marcos has shown a capability to do some course corrections, to be able to learn lessons and to be able to make some adjustments. One example of this is the purging of political loyalists in the Office of the Executive Secretary and the Office of the Press Secretary. So, and there are indications that in their stead, instead of political loyalists, he has appointed, a competent, has appointed competent people in its stead. For example, Luis Bersamin, of course, was former Chief Justice, and in the press secretary, we do have an acting press secretary who has a background in radio and print broadcasting. So one good news is that he has been able to correct some of the 30 mistakes. So one grave mistake of the previous administration was really to shift away from PPP, and in fact making those midnight changes to the PPP, which made it very anti-investor. So they've come out with an amendment to the amended implementing rules and regulations of the BOT, which should, it's not perfect, but it should be good enough to be able to attract investments in the PPP projects. So I think there are indications that he is continuing Duterte's liberal and foreign investment-friendly policies. One example of this is that renewable energy liberalization. The Department of Justice came out with a opinion saying that renewable energy is not natural resources and therefore not subject to the 60-40 rule. I think the Department of Energy will shortly issue an amended IRR to be able to operationalize this liberalization. I know for a fact that the Duterte administration also tried to push this under the NEDA, but the DOJ then did not issue a favorable opinion. So I think there are some encouraging signals that there's no crony capitalism so far. There has been, as you know, a veto on the San Miguel Corporation airport, and therefore that has to be resubmitted to the House for approval. The other, major decision that they've made is the ERC decision on SMC Power Meralco request for power rate adjustment. And I think the ERC has stood pat that we have to respect the sanctity of contracts, not to prejudice the consumers, and therefore they did not agree to the adjustment of request by SMC Power. Again, a good news is that yes, so far not reversed the correct policies of the previous administration. There was a fear, especially during the campaign, that he would be reversing the rice tarification law and he would be reviving the trading operations of the National Food Authority. So far, he has not given indications to that, and therefore we should consider this as a good news. Well, I wouldn't call this bad news, but I think we are still waiting for more good news. Well, in terms of the foreign policy, President Bongbong Jr. seems to be swinging back to a centrist foreign policy, not as pro-China as the previous administration, nor as pro-American as under former President Benigno Aquino Jr. He prioritized a trip to the United States as one of his major to-dos in this administration. However, of course, we still have to see what are the positive and practical effects of that. Because on one hand, it can also draw us, moving closer to the United States, can also move us closer to a possible conflict over Taiwan in China. On the other hand, so far the United States has indicated that they will not give any tariff concessions under the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So we still have to see what will be the practical effects of this rebalancing of foreign policy toward the United States. So far also, this will be under foreign trade. There's been no action on RCEP. He has indicated, I think, that he's in favor of this, but so far he has not goaded the Senate to ratify our membership in RCEP. And the clock is ticking. We have 18 months since its approval in January of this year to approve our membership into that organization. Well, I think this is so far, you might say, the not so good news yet. We're waiting for the good news. As Dr. Holmes indicated, this is the inflation is a major concern of the public. And inflation is primarily driven by food inflation. So far, we have not seen a clear plan to address the food crisis and agricultural problems. In fact, I think the economic team may have been gun shy after this brouhaha over or the controversy over sugar importation. With respect to liberalizing food imports to be able to address the current shortages. The sugar mess remains a mess. The sugar prices, retail prices, still I think above 70 pesos a kilo, not yet back to the levels of the normal levels of 40 pesos a kilo. So the president's approval of 100, I think 150,000 metric tons of sugar may not have been enough. So this is something that I think will be a major challenge moving forward, and especially the fact that he is the Secretary of Agriculture. So we're still waiting the good news for this, and so far there's been no clear plan to address the food shortage. From my point of view, there is no clear economic legislative agenda as far as addressing, as I said, the food shortages and also the long-term sustainable growth. Fiscal consolidation is not enough. Increasing taxes, etc., is not enough. So I think there has to be more movement with respect to the other economic legislative agenda of the administration, such as ratifying RCEP, passing a livestock development bill, and maybe amending the comprehensive agrarian reform law. Those are still missing from his economic legislative agenda. The other thing is that the IRR on the amended public service is still pending. So that's been 100 days already, and so far we haven't seen the IRR that will sort of operationalize the amended Public Service Act or the liberalization of foreign investments in telecommunications and transport. The other problem is that there's no roadmap for boosting mining. We heard before that Secretary Ben Jokno say that mining will contribute to a lot to the country's GDP growth, and I agree. The problem is there's still the clear roadmap. There is still uncertainty on the part of investors with respect to the tax regime on mining. So again, still no clear roadmaps for boosting the various industries. Well, there are concerns about rising criminality and attacks against the press. No, this too not only about media. We have seen with the um, uh, assassination of a radio broadcaster, and also a lot of kidnappings. Of course, this involves pogos, but there is concern about rising criminality. So he has to address these problems before it erodes his political capital. Health still a major concern. We're not officially out of the pandemic, although it's supposedly an endemic. There's been no DOH secretary, no clear health agenda, no exit plan. Are we going to be buying more uh, vaccines that are resistant with the new variants? What is the plan? There's no clear plan yet enunciated by the administration to address the health crisis. Well, okay, we go to the missed opportunities. I think, the president, we can move on. Yeah, I think the, the president's theme was really national unity. And I think if so I think there was a missed opportunity for him to have agreed to the renewal of the ABS-CBN franchise to as a signal that he is willing to unite with the opposition to address the pressing problems of the nation. I understand, of course, that some of President Duterte's men have objected to the renewal of the ABS-CBN franchise. But again, I see this as a missed opportunity for President Bongbong Marcos to give more substance to his national campaign theme. The same thing is, I think, awaiting the Lilia de Lima case. Again, freeing her would probably be a good signal that he is very serious about his theme of national unity. So conclusion, I think overall, President Bongbong Marcos or Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has exceeded expectations. The expectations or the criticism then was that he would be, either another that will be like his father. He would impose martial law, etc. Or on the other hand, that he would be lazy, not do anything, etc. Certainly, he has exceeded expectations, and as Dr. Holmes mentioned, he has been able to build a functioning government. But at the same time, he faced challenges in controlling inflation, attaining food security, ensuring peace and order, and sustaining economic growth. We still have to see whether he'll be able to face up to those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Toti Shikyamko, for providing us with the big picture on the economic situation of the country and the achievement so far of the Marcos Jr. administration, although he also mentioned the missed opportunities. So perhaps he can elaborate further on that and with the questions from our audience. So let us now move to our next speaker. She is a public budget analyst.
Sir, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So let me now introduce our next speaker. She is a public budget analyst and is the current executive director of the Institute for Leadership, Empowerment, and Democracy, or ILEAD. She previously served at the Department of Budget and Management and the Department of Trade and Industry, and is regularly involved in Congress as a technical expert on the national budget. She is a public policy, governance, and development professional with several years of experience in the Philippine government, the international development sector, and civil society. To speak now on civil society engagement in the first 100 days under the Marcos Jr. administration, let us all welcome Sisa Nadine Sosara. Sisa?
Thank you, Dr. Magno. Oops. Sorry. Can you where's my screen? There. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Sisa.
There. Good morning, everyone, and thank you again to StratBase for inviting me to bring in the view from civil society as well as the proposed national budget. Really feel very honored to be among the seasoned experts in this panel. So this morning, I'll basically just have a quick presentation what the president came upon, much of which has already been discussed by previous speakers and also Prof. Guindo Manhit during his introduction. What the president accomplished so far, again, most of these have also been discussed already by our previous speakers, but I'll add what the perception has been from different sectors of society and what can we expect based on the proposed national budget. Although I do agree that there's still a lot to be seen with respect to how President Marcos's policies and initiatives will involve. There is actually a concrete indication of what those priorities will be if we look at the proposed budget for 2023. So basically, what did he come upon? Of course, the economy showed signs of rebound, but growth in some sectors remained below pre-pandemic challenge, and this is a pre-pandemic levels, and this is a huge challenge. This slide, by the way, came from President Marcos's own economic management team. So sectors that remain below pre-pandemic levels are accommodation, food services, other services, which of course might include tourism, transportation and storage, mining and quarrying, real estate, and ownership of dwellings. Again, inflation, which is a global challenge right now, continues to plague us. In the first 4 months, it averaged 4.7%, and that's way below the target of the economic managers in the 2022 fiscal program. So I believe it's 6.9% recently, and most of it is driven by inflation in food and transport. So despite the reopening of the economy and unemployment and underemployment figures improving, the fact is it still remains relatively high. So there's still 2.6 million Filipinos unemployed, still 6.5 Filipinos who consider themselves unemployed. And worse is, based on the latest PSA data, there's higher poverty incidence post-pandemic. So 2.3 million Filipinos became poor. So what did he accomplish so far, given that economic and socio-economic backdrop? As our previous speakers already mentioned, he did say this, that he managed to accomplish putting together a functional government. So that involved appointing new cabinet officials, appointing new ministers of the new Bangsamoro Transition Authority, but also directing appointees and contractual employees of the previous administration to step down. So that was his first memorandum circular back in June 30. And then, of course, the state visits and the UN speech where he talked about climate change. So foreign relations and securing investments appear to be major priorities of President Marcos, and he did say that he secured investment pledges amounting to 4 billion from the United States for IT, BPO, and manufacturing, 8.5 billion from Indonesia for a PPP infrastructure project, renewable energy, garments, and others, 6.5 billion from Singapore for e-trikes and solar energy. And of course, he did submit the 2023 proposed budget within the time period prescribed under our constitution. And he did say in his budget message that the formula for prosperity is simple: increase productivity within the overriding commitment to leave no Filipino behind, including Filipinos of the next generation. So that was the running theme of his budget message. So the Marcos administration submitted its first national expenditure program amounting to 5.3 trillion pesos, and it's touted as an agenda for prosperity, economic transformation towards inclusivity and sustainability. And of course, that included all of the technical details that he spoke about during his first State of the Nation address. However, despite all of these accomplishments on foreign relations, securing investments, and when he made those state visits, there is a perception among different sectors of society who have been affected by the pandemic that ordinary Filipinos feel that they were left behind. And a lot of the issues that were raised were withstanding issues that he basically inherited from the Duterte administration due to inefficiency in the implementation of many programs that were already funded anyway in the 2021 and the 2022 General Appropriations Act. So that includes the non-payment of compensation and benefits of COVID-19 healthcare workers. So they protested again recently, which they did last year when the 2022 budget was being legislated. Members of the 4Ps program and even those in the grassroots community say that up until now, there's delayed payout of cash assistance programs, and it was partly due to the cleaning up of the beneficiary list, which he ordered DSWD to do. There's also lack of transport and logistic support for farmers and fisher folks, which some economists say are also driving up food inflation in our country. As for the transport sector, there seems to be consensus that there's a lack of urgent action to ease the suffering of the commuting public and the PUV drivers, especially because of the return to work and the return to school policies that the government have pursued. And there's really lack of targeted support for the most vulnerable because of inflation and uncertainty. So although these problems did not emerge recently, many civil society organizations say that this could have been the top priorities of the Marcos administration in terms of the day-to-day work of governance. And apart from that, since COVID-19 is not yet over, there's also a very strong concern that there's still no health secretary, while the positivity rate actually remains relatively high in NCR and in other parts of the country, where in provinces like Tarlac, there's over 50% positivity rate. So that's a huge cause for concern. Booster doses also remain extremely low. We're only at 20 million doses as of the latest DOH data, which you can see here. And the number of Filipinos who have completed 2 doses is only 73 million. And then related to the non-payment of compensation and benefits of health frontliners, there's also delay in PhilHealth reimbursements of private hospitals until now, and they renewed their call for PhilHealth to already process these reimbursements as late as last week. And then if we look at the spending performance of the entire bureaucracy, all of the programs and the projects that were not moving pretty much reflect the low spending performance of the entire national government. So the 2020 General Appropriations Act is still valid until the end of this year. And there's still about 184 billion pesos left from that. But it's already October, we've entered the last quarter of 2021, and yet obligations or what agencies manage to contract out is only at 50%. disbursement even much lower at 22% of the 184 billion pesos that remains from the 2021 budget. And then the national government is also currently implementing the 2022 General Appropriations Act. So that's 5 trillion pesos, 4.6 trillion pesos has already been released to different government agencies as well as GOCCs and local government units. But the total obligations only amount to 2 trillion pesos. That's equivalent to only 58%. Disbursements, or what has actually been paid out to different contractors and service providers, a low 37%. So there will definitely be a lot of catching up to do. And what this indicates is really a slowdown in the implementation of many key programs, not just what was left from the Duterte administration, but also what the Marcos administration needs to fast track, because we will again have a new budget next year, the one that's currently being legislated, and that will clog up the many agencies unable to spend these funds. And in the end, it's ordinary Filipinos who belong to different sectors of society who lose out because of this kind of inefficiency. So what can we expect though from the proposed national budget? And towards the conclusion, this is where I want to highlight that this is actually an indication of what the priorities will be for the next 6 years of the Marcos administration. So when we look at the proposed budget, we look at two things. First, the avalanches, or where the major increases on the budget went, as well as the incremental increases. Avalanches basically reflect macro political decisions, those made by the president himself or Congress. Increments normally reflect changes based on technical evaluations by bureaucrats. So where did we see the avalanches in the 2023 proposed budget? We saw it in basic education. There's about 74.5 billion peso increase in the DepEd budget, which is actually a good thing. Agriculture had a 46.5 billion total increase, so that constitutes the budget of the DA proper, as well as the attached government corporations in charge of different agriculture portfolios. Health also had a 26.7 billion peso increase, but that largely went to PhilHealth. Transportation had a 91.4 billion peso increase in the budget of the DOTR, and that was mainly for 3 railway programs. However, the biggest increase in the budget went to the special purpose funds, amounting to 178.2 billion pesos. This includes budgets for the adjustments of salaries, payments of the pension, as well as lump sum funds, like the NTF, LCAC budget, the Growth Equity Fund, which is supposed to help the most local government units who are lagging behind, and that's in relation to the implementation of the Mandanas-Garcia ruling. And we saw the increments in tourism. So there's only a 777.1 million peso increase in the budget of the Department of Tourism, despite pronouncements that tourism will be one of the industries that should drive economic recovery. The police only had 801 million peso increase, so their budget pretty much plateaued compared to the military. So the social protection budget was cut by 8 billion pesos, despite what I discussed earlier, where 2.3 million Filipinos slid down the poverty line. The budget for labor decreased by 25 billion. What was largely cut was the funds for emergency livelihood assistance. MSMEs, the funds of the DTI for helping MSMEs was cut by 1.9 billion pesos, and the subsidies for the SB Corporation was further cut by 500 million pesos. So with this kind of budget structure budget prioritization, what conclusions can we draw from it? Basically, it's the president, the military, and the vice president who benefits from the avalanches in the 2023 National Expenditure Program. Why do we say it's the president, the military, and the vice president? This is because increases went to the office of president, agriculture, of course, because he's the agriculture secretary, the special purpose funds, because these are lump sums that the president has discretion over. His approval is required in order to release those funds. Then the military, of course, because the AFP budget also, although I did not mention it in the previous slides, the AFP did get a significant increase as well. The budgets for NTF LCAP also increased in the executive proposed version. And then a large chunk of what went to the special purpose funds will go to the pension of the unpaid pension of the military. That's about 130 something billion pesos of the total increase in the 2023 proposed budget. And of course, the vice president, as you saw earlier, education had the biggest increase amounting to 75 billion pesos, but it's not just so it's not just the OVP's budget that the vice president has control over, but that's also the budget for basic education. Although I'd like to add that the budget of the DepEd is 80% for salaries. Nonetheless, it's still around 150 something billion pesos for the operations of DepEd. So just some amounts that we computed based on based on the budgets of those offices that I mentioned. So the president has roughly 243 billion pesos that he has control over. The military has earmarks amounting, the military and the pensioners have earmarks amounting to 373.4 billion pesos, and the vice president 157 billion pesos. So that's the budget for the office of the vice president as well as the operations budget of the DepEd. So what can we conclude? What can we expect based on the national budget? So the budgets for economic recovery and the continued fight against COVID-19 do not appear to be major priorities. In fact, I would go as far as to say that it's a budget that assumes a scenario where there's no more COVID. So there are no funds for vaccine booster shots and other COVID-related expenditures. There's less emphasis, obviously, for people-centered programs. And although there are increases in the budgets of education and agriculture, that reflects the politics of the budget as well. The military continues to enjoy support, not so much the PNP. And infrastructure continues to be a priority. The president did mention this during the SONA. And even though the budget of the DPWH was significantly cut, there's still room for a lot of patronage-driven projects. So I guess that's what we can expect. This is the kind of prioritization that we can expect in the next few years of his term, because normally the first budget of a new administration signals what's important to that administration. So let's see if there might be some changes in the next years, and if there will be improvements in how these budgets are spent for programs that would benefit ordinary Filipinos. So thank you, and I'll be happy to respond to questions later.
Thank you very much, Saisa, for walking us through the different components of the proposed budget and what to expect in the coming months. I'm sure there would be lots of clarification later. So thank you, Saisa. Let us now proceed with our next speaker, who is currently the Executive Director of the Makati Business Club. Prior to joining MBC, he was a bureau chief at Bloomberg News and Business News head and anchor at ABS-CBN News Channel, where he anchored Business Nightly and Inside Business. He is an experienced leader and communicator with extensive network from media and advocacy careers. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Mr. Coco Alcuas, who will discuss with us the prospects for private sector engagement and PPPs in the Marcos Jr. administration. Coco.
Thanks very much, Kiko. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks very much, Kiko. Thank you, Dindo and StratBase, for inviting MBC to be part of this very interesting discussion. I'm very honored to be part of a group with Dottie, Ronnie, and Zaiza under your excellent moderation, Kiko. First of all, an apology. I don't have slides. I'm traveling right now and didn't have the time to make up some slides. But I really have just 2 points, so it should be okay to do it without slides, hopefully. My task today is to talk about private sector engagement and PPPs. But private sector engagement really is, in a way, public-private partnership as well, except without the capital letters. So, in a way, I would say that my whole discussion this morning is about PPPs, both the uppercase version, which constitutes infrastructure projects, and the lowercase version, which constitutes more the engagement part. I'll begin with a spoiler alert. Much of what I'll say is positive in general, but also a caveat. At 100 days, as some of you have pointed out, we're only at about a little less than 5% of this administration's term of office. If there are hopeful and positive signs, there's also a lot of time and a lot of political headwind always to turn us in a less positive direction. We have to work so that these trends continue and deepen as well over the next few years. So let me begin with private sector engagement, the lowercase PPP. For these public sector engagements, the critical factor really is the tone from the top and the tone from the start. And there's 4 or 5 points I'd like to mention here. First, the president's words, then his creation of the Private Sector Advisory Council, the business delegations he's organized, and then finally, what's happened with the BPO work from home issue. So first of all, the president's words. And after what I would describe, or what could be described as a policy light election campaign by the administration, he didn't say much about policy then. Hearing him both in his inaugural, but especially in his SONA, speak words such as making the Philippines an investment destination, private sector participation, partnerships with the private sector were really taken by the business sector as a very good signal that there's going to be a change or a shift in how government considered and dealt with the private sector as compared especially with the previous government. And that is very much welcome because business really just wants to be a partner in building the country and creating jobs. And that is the purpose for many businesses. And we just want to be able to do that. And the signal from this government is that they do see the private sector as a partner. The second point is the Private Sector Advisory Council. Some may say this is just more committees, but really, in some ways, it's an unprecedented way for the government to bring the private sector into government or to help government. There are just a handful of committees which may indicate that they've decided what areas their priorities are, or at least the areas where they believe the private sector can make the most effort. There's a lot of talk about the government not having very clear policies, and I get that. But at least in this point, they've chosen 4 areas or 5 areas where they believe the private sector can help greatly. It's also drawn about 30 plus high-level executives, most of them CEOs, some of them former CEOs, into a collaboration with the government that reaches all the major business groups and many smaller companies. And that's an unprecedented way to really unite both the government and the private sector in what should be a joint effort. The moment the Private Sector Advisory Council meeting started, we were all in the business sector waiting with bated breath for feedback on the meetings with the president. You will remember that in the previous government, there were very few meetings with the president, very little communication with the president, and even with his top economic advisors. So to get feedback from these meetings was very much awaited. And the first feedback really was that the meetings were very businesslike. They started on time. He asked very direct questions on what's the problem, what's the possible solution, and then would staff it out. And that was a very welcome. These are very welcome comments coming from some of these participants in these private sector advisory council meetings. The proposals that are being discussed there and are being proposed there really have a very heavy private sector component. They really emphasize private sector collaboration, not just in PPPs, not just in the infrastructure type of PPPs, but really areas such as skills development councils, investment promotion, and the like. So these are partnerships or collaboration between the private sector and the government that don't involve building bridges, highways, and airports and the like, which are all important, but really working on interventions that really help accelerate the economic growth, accelerate the recovery, and create more jobs. The president has said that the Private Sector Advisory Council would be paired with cabinet clusters, and they would meet regularly to help ensure that recommendations are acted upon and that they can collaborate as needed. They would attend meetings of the steering committee of the Philippine Development Plan, of the steering committee of the Philippine Development Plan, once that's set up, I think within the next few weeks. That steering committee will have a private sector participant as well. I think when you talk about this private sector advisory council, like I said, which is kind of an unprecedented effort, the real question is how to keep it sustainable. They need quick wins, and in fact, in parts of their discussion, they talk about we need to have low-hanging fruit or quick wins, and then longer-term goals. It's a very business-oriented approach to solving problems and addressing challenges ahead of them. I think the other huge challenge they would have is they really need to coordinate with the government, particularly the perpetual / entrenched bureaucracy. We all know that there are cabinet secretaries, presidents come and go, cabinet secretaries come and go, but there is a bureaucracy there that has run these departments for a very long time. They believe in what they stand for and what they've been pursuing, and it's really important to engage them so that these discussions of the Peace Act don't remain at that level, but really seep down, and some of them get implemented. The other thing I would add is, while it is really welcome that the government has made this effort to bring the private sector in, one would wish that there was a similar effort, and I hope someone can point out to me that I'm missing something, that there's a similar effort to reach out, for example, to labor groups and other groups, not just the private sector, not just the business sector as the private sector. The third point I'll mention, so the first was the president's words, the second was the Private Sector Advisory Council, was the business delegations that the president has organized to Indonesia, Singapore, and of course the US. I don't really put much store in supposedly how many $1 billion he's put in, he's brought back from these trips. That's, I think that's a PR or media thing, no matter what president you're talking about. What you're really talking about, more importantly, I think, is the kinds of business leaders he's able to bring with him to represent the country to the countries that he visits. And obviously, in the previous government, there were fewer of these visits. There were 0 visits, by the way, to the US. There was 5, I think, to China, and 2 to Russia, 0 to the US. We start on a very good note by making the first non-Southeast Asia visit one to the US, and with the big kinds of business delegations that he organized for those. The fourth point is what's happened to the BPO work from home industry. Very early this year, in the previous administration, it emerged that the BPOs would not be able to allow their workers to stay at home, even after they'd gotten used to that, even after they made a Herculean effort to move workers to their homes in order to keep their businesses running, to keep them employed 2.5 years ago. that was going to be taken away from them very quickly because of how the law is written. It's really a question of the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. And as this new government came in, the BPO industry and others in the business sector really talked to the government officials to try to get them to see a way out of this. And it was interesting because you could see how the engagement came. The conversation would change. Should we amend this law? Should we revise that regulation? Should we do this or that? And it kept on changing, which I thought was a good sign, because that's how normal government should work. It shouldn't be someone dictating a solution or a policy, but people working together to try to come up with a solution. And they've come up with one right now that substantially works. There's more that can be improved about it, but the BPOs will be able to remain competitive with the policy change they've made. With all of these signals, I'll just speak for a while about MBC. We met very few cabinet secretaries in the previous 6 years. In the first 3 months of this administration, actually starting from just before the administration was inaugurated, we've met 10 or 11 cabinet secretaries and agency heads. We come into these meetings offering our help, and then we leave with some assignments to work on. Smaller issues compared with what the PSAC is working on, but it's again an example of how the private sector can be engaged, and that the government is welcoming private sector engagement in their governance. So that is the PPPs for the private sector engagement part. Let me talk about PPP's infrastructure. And just like we were really thrilled when the president started talking about making the Philippines an investment destination, we're really thrilled when Secretary R.C. Balisacan, who was headed for NEDA, again, headed to return to NEDA, talked about revitalizing PPPs. PPPs will be a thrust for the government because of the huge national debt we have, partly because of COVID, but also because the president's a big believer in PPPs, we gather. We've heard that from Secretary Balisacan. We've heard that from at least one other former government official, both of whom had talked with or introduced the idea of PPPs to the president even before he was running, during his governor days in Ilocos. And he was a believer then, and apparently remains a believer now. He's even been talking recently about LGUs getting more active in the PPP market. And one indication, and the biggest indication really of how important PPPs are to this government, are what Toti mentioned a while ago, is the very quick revision of the revisions made by the Duterte administration just earlier this year. And by last month, this administration had revised those revisions in the BOT IRR, the Build, Operate, Transfer Internal Rules and Regulations, which were revised early this year to make BOTs or PPPs much less attractive or even viable for private sector participants. And that's more or less changed now, more or less back to what it was before. As Toti said, not perfect, but good enough. In fact, one private sector player in this space, when I asked him a couple of days ago for feedback to share with you, he said, it's now much easier for the Philippines to pitch to foreign partners with these amendments, and that overall the tone that the DOF and others have set is that they're truly willing to work with the private sector to address concerns, and that the tone that he feels is that the government is fair but firm. The only issue, or the main issue I would have with PPPs, is really speed. If you look at even how the Aquino government put out PPPs, it took 2 or 3 years before the major ones would come out. And hopefully there is enough pipeline, although as Toti pointed out, the Duterte administration was philosophically against PPPs. Hopefully there's enough of a pipeline that we'll get PPPs out, PPP projects out quickly within the next year or so. That's the main issue there. All in all, let me wrap up by saying both for the private sector engagement and the infrastructure PPPs, the prospects are good, but we really have to help and work with the government to intensify them, embed them, speed them up, and keep us on the same correct track. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Coco, for sharing with us your thoughts about private sector engagement with the administration. So maybe we can pick up on that. Are we seeing this administration is more consultative, more participatory compared to the previous administration? So let us hear from Toti.
Oh yeah, I mean, there are, as Coco pointed out, they're more inclined to solicit. I mean, and I hope that they will uphold the sanctity of contracts, which the previous administration did not do. You know, I think this the ruling of ERC on the SMC power, it may be indicative of that.
Okay, because there are fears before that there might be a return of crony capitalism. So we are not seeing this this trend.
So far,
Yes.
we're not seeing that.
Okay, can I ask Saisa your thoughts about this?
I think with respect to consultation with civil society organizations, it might not be as positive as it is with the business sector because, well, so far, there's not been an opportunity yet to consult civil society organizations, at least in terms of the budget process, because of course the administration is also constrained to put together the proposed budget in a very short time. In fact, just a month. So maybe we'll be able to see if there will be developments on that front next year. Although we're hearing feedback that some of the sectors do have a difficult time getting in touch with some of the departments, especially those stakeholders and beneficiaries of the DSWD and the DA, which include both farmers and fisher folks. So let's see. Although I must say that at least with respect to budget legislation, the space has always been there for civil society to participate.
Yeah, Coco also mentioned that he wished that the labor sector can also have the same level of consultation
Yes.
with the administration. So is it possible that it's also because of the appointments that have been made in the various departments? So there is more consultation because of the quality of appointments. I think Toti also mentioned that. Let us go to Ronnie. Ronnie, because you have these indicators of functional government. So what is your perspective on this? And with respect to also the urgent issues that Pulse Asia is monitoring.
Can you repeat the question, Kiko?
Yeah, in terms of because we were discussing the consultation process. So is it also in relation to the types of appointments that have been made by the president over the past 100 days?
I think it really differs based on the agency concern. Maybe there's better consultation in other agencies. I mean, Saisa would know, for example, in terms of the budget, you basically leave out, except for at a certain point in time during the Aquino administration, when there was bottom-up budgeting. That's really a game between the executive and the legislative. And then you also have concerns coming from local government units who are close to legislators. But you have more participation now coming in, at least at several levels of the nation, the government, on issues such as education and the environment. So there are areas where I think historically there's more civic engagement, but there are areas where, let's say on security, it's really something that's more exclusive. On budget is also exclusive. So whether you can get to participate in those areas would depend largely on the openness of the government itself.
So maybe let's look at the continuing with the appointment process, because there are key appointments that have not been made, especially the Department of Health. And a lot of you mentioned there's still a health crisis. So what's keeping the president from appointing a health secretary? So maybe Coco has some inside information on this.
I suspect in this group, the person you have to ask that is one with the insider information, which is Dindo. I do not know why the president hasn't appointed a health secretary, and I don't know why he hasn't changed his mind about the agriculture side. The other person you might want to ask, because he's close friends with the whole economic team, is Toti Chikyamko. When you talk about the business sector getting consulted, that's mostly Toti Chikyamko and his friends, actually.
No, of course not.
Okay, I'll ask Toti, because I don't think Dindo would like to answer because he's not the panel member. Unless Dindo would like to weigh in on this issue.
If Toti had a good friend who was a doctor, that person would be health secretary.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay,
I think Coco is asking you, Toti, for the answer.
No, I think Dindo opened his camera, so I think he has an answer.
Okay,
No.
Dindo.
No answer
what-
from my end, except the possibility that maybe they're trying to work with the bureaucracy of the Department of Health and see how the professionals performs, or maybe somebody who might have a one-year ban. That's just that I'm just intriguing on that on that angle, if there is any. But we need some clarity in leadership, because the nature of bureaucracy, if you have an acting secretary, there will be limits to what he or she can really do and perform, and even the bureaucracy itself might not be able to would like to maybe take strong initiatives or even strategic initiatives, because you're not knowing who might be the leader down the line, 2 months down the road, 3 months down the road. So just speculating on my end.
I think
I'll stay away from this,
Yes.
and I'll
yes.
stay away now from the
Okay.
ideas of great minds here.
I
Okay,
think
thank you, Dindo. So I think Toti will now answer.
Well, I think they're really slow. They want to be. They probably are betting it. I think that's not the only position that remains open. I think the position of PLLO, the presidential legislative officer, is not yet been filled up also. I mean, there are still, I think, a number of positions that remain open. I think they're taking their time. So this might be the reason why they have not appointed somebody to that position.
So given the slow appointments on certain fronts, how does it compare to the previous administration? Because I understand the previous administration also had a hard time filling up positions.
The previous administration filled it up with all their Davao cronies, right? And the Sanbeda, what's that? The law alumni, what's that? Lex Talionis or something. I don't think you compare it really. The appointments of the previous administration with the present, and certainly the appointments now are more stellar compared with the previous administration. In fact, President Duterte appointed leftists in his cabinet, in the SWD, in DAR, which those are during their time, those were considered lost years because they were effectively sabotaging the work of government when they were in the cabinet.
Yes. Okay. Yes, Coco.
And just to add to that, what Toti was saying, I think Toti would know, and I suspect that Dindo knows, I'm sure Dindo knows as well. actually, this government has made a great effort to ask a lot of private sector people to join the government. But I think, public services has gotten so toxic in many countries, but especially this one. It's very hard to serve your country and then face political and legal issues later on. That many of those being asked have to politely decline. We're getting that feedback, but my point being, they're at least asking those people, and I guess a few of them are saying yes. We certainly didn't get that kind of feedback in the previous government. They were sticking to a certain circle or certain circles of people. The people they're asking now are people they don't know, people whose CVs have come up to them and have been pointed out as good potential, but given how toxic politics is or public services in our country, many of them are politely declining.
So before we leave this issue, let me ask Saisa, because Saisa is serving government. How is it different now compared to the previous administrations in terms of the vetting process? Because of course it's a presidential prerogative. But how is it based on your experience in the past?
I think it does take time as well to vet the possible candidates. But I think that the difference is, unlike in the previous administration, they already know who they were going to appoint, as Dr. Totti mentioned. It was pretty much a cliquish type of appointment. So I would say though that it looks like they're considering people from career officials from inside the bureaucracy. And I also agree that it might be difficult for them to recruit someone, especially a doctor from the private sector, considering how big of a problem the COVID-19 crisis really is. And it would involve not just managing, of course, the DOH, but practically the IATF, an interagency effort where the DOH will have to lead the public health policy moving forward, which would of course impact on how the economic recovery and all of the other programs will shape up.
Okay, thank you, Saisa. Let us go back to Ronnie. Ronnie, you made mention of the honeymoon period. How is this honeymoon period with President Marcos compared to the previous period administration, and how is it reflected in the survey that you conducted?
Well, this honeymoon period is different because Kiko, this president was elected with a majority vote. It's also surprising that despite the majority vote, Duterte the Duterte administration had better performance ratings at the start. So maybe this is reflective that there is a more lesser appreciation, more subdued expectations with regard to Marcos on the part of the public, that the majority support doesn't translate to higher performance ratings on addressing issues. Given the difficulties that we're facing right now, it's not the same as Duterte, who really just signaled that his intent really is to just solve criminality. And we know that the crime rates are also increasing right now. So whether this will last, in the case of Duterte, it lasted for 6 years, no? And for some reason, whether this will last, this honeymoon will be extended. We saw this honeymoon period was quite extended under Noynoy. He recovered from an early setback, which was the hostage crisis. That happened sometime in August 2010. But the first time that his performance ratings dipped, if I'm not mistaken, was already in the lead up to the 2013 elections.
The Mama Sapano case?
No, 2013. That Mama Sapano happened before the 2016 elections. So it took about 2.5 years for his performance ratings to really significantly change. I don't know whether Bongbong can carry it through in the same manner, given that the conditions are really quite difficult now.
Is strategic communications part of this?
It definitely is. Definitely is. And if you know the press secretary, But he remember that Marcos Jr. mentioned at the start that he doesn't need a spokesperson. Whether that is good or bad, it's the same question as whether it is good or bad for him to continue to hold on to the agriculture portfolio.
Yeah, thank you, Ronnie. I think Coco has worked in media, and yeah, are you responding to Ronnie?
Just a quick comment on what Ronnie said about in Duterte's case, his ratings stayed high very long, and his performance ratings stayed high as well. Well, in this case, there's a kind of in the case of President Marcos, there's a kind of a disconnect between that. I'd like to see that, or I see that as a kind of a normalization, meaning we don't have a president anymore, as we did for 6 years, who had some kind of I'll use the word strange adulation from the people that kind of kept him insulated from any issue or most issues. Here you have a more normal situation, I think, where you have a president who is popular, winning the greatest majority, but you see his ratings fluctuate or differ from issue to issue, and you see some low points there already as early as now. I think that's very interesting. Just like in the policy side, dealing with them is not a one-way conversation, but a real conversation. So I hope and I welcome the possibility that we're entering a kind of a normal period in our politics, a more normal period in politics, where one man is not determining everything, and nothing he says is wrong, and everything he says goes.
So are you saying, Coco, with your term normalization, that there is less populism nowadays?
On the face of it, yes. I mean, we all know that there's a great social media infrastructure there that can sway sentiment in various ways. But on the face of it, and looking at the survey that Ronnie just shared, I think that there is a kind of normalization there. I think Toti had something to say.
Yeah, Toti, there's also a question for you in the Q&A. Although you answered it, I think there's requests that you speak to it greater length, Toti, regarding the global recession.
I'll wait first. I'll answer. I want to say there's a difference between the Duterte's 100 days and PBM's 100 days. The President Duterte had, was held by the tailwinds of positive economic growth and benign inflation when he came to power. I mean, we have a different situation when we have Bongbong Marcos facing, a very harsh geopolitical environment, high oil prices, uncertainty, the rivalry between the US and China. So I think we should differentiate the two presidents with respect to that. No, admittedly, the President Duterte had that common touch, able to communicate with Juan de la Cruz. But again, let us wait. Again, we have to make that. We have to differentiate the conditions then and now. Now, with respect to the global recession, I think I answered that. If your concern is about the global recession, it shouldn't affect us that much because we're not an export-oriented economy, unlike Vietnam or other countries. Most of our growth is really coming from domestic consumption spending. So that should not be a concern. Our concern is really about inflation and, of course, slowing economic growth, because right now we're hostage to the US monetary policy. They keep increasing interest rates, which leads to the weaker peso, which leads to some secondary effects on inflation, and our central bank is being forced to increase interest rates when we're all just getting out of the pandemic. So that is in part of our problems. Really, inflation is really supply driven. It is not a problem of excess demand.
Okay, Toti, while you're at it, let me read this question. There is a pending question here in the Q&A. It has to do with food security. These are all relevant and can help move the needle on a number of social issues, especially food security, our biggest problem. So I think the question is, can you elaborate more on what has to be done to address food security?
Well, in the short term, demand is always short of supply. I mean, and therefore, the answer to that is to liberalize food importation. The part of the problem is that there are quantitative restrictions and high tariffs still on corn, sugar, chicken, and pork. So the key to reducing inflation is really to allow more supply to come in. Abolish this quantitative or reduce them, expand the QRs, reduce our tariffs. I think in corn it's still about 35%, whereas in Vietnam it's 4%. And corn is a input to chicken and pork. So in the short term, we have no choice but to liberalize. But in the longer term, our problem is really the restrictive provisions in our land reform law. This has led to land fragmentation. The average land size now is about 1 hectare. You cannot have increased productivity, mechanization, improved management at 1 hectare or less. And if under the law, it is landowners is limited to 5 hectares. So effectively, you're telling successful farmers you're not allowed to expand. So the key to long-term productivity is to amend CARL, the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law.
Okay, we have just a few minutes remaining, but I wanted to ask Saisa about the budget. This whole issue about confidential funds. So what are we seeing here, Saisa, with all this? Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are, of course, confidential funds in the Office of the President, in the PNP military, all those agencies involved in law enforcement and security. But this time around in the proposed 2023 NEP, we also see confidential funds in the budget of the Office of the Vice President, as well as the DepEd, and that's unprecedented. But what I can say though is in the Office of the Vice President, there's really huge allocation for confidential and no, just confidential funds. Confidential funds are different from intelligence funds, and so one wonders where and what exactly will those confidential funds be used for. The Vice President did say, however, that for the funds that are in DepEd, they intend to use it for what's this? And some type of anti-communism activity, because students are also getting recruited, but then shouldn't those funds be lodged anyway in the budgets of the proper law enforcement agencies? Because as it is, we already have a very limited fiscal space. We know about the debt. We know that Congress in the lower house had a hard time reallocating funds for other more urgent things, like, for example, public health. Many of the subsidies for public health hospitals were slashed by about the same amount of confidential funds that the Office of the Vice President and the DepEd Secretary will receive. So there's also that question, not only with respect to the discretionary nature of the intelligence funds, but also, the confidential funds, but also the seemingly misguided prioritization again of funds going to non-urgent expenditures like those.
Okay, thank you, Saisa. I think we don't have much time. Has been a very interesting discussion, but I'll just ask or pose one last question because this has been raised, I think, by all the panel members. The bureaucratic inefficiency, and especially Coco mentioned that the government has to address bureaucratic inefficiency. Of course, it's not just this government, but even previous administrations. But the president in the State of the Nation address also spoke about a digital Philippines. So what is needed to carry this out? Also right-sizing the bureaucracy. So let us just do one final round of responses from our distinguished panel members to end this session. So let us start with Ronnie. Of course, based on your survey, there are items there on the graft and corruption. And is there something also on better public services in the survey?
I can only recall, not necessarily the survey, but when we ask people basically on the extent of corruption is greatest from their perception at the local government unit, followed by the national government agency. Now, on that question of whether people recognize the need for government right-sizing and what the possibility is, beyond survey data, I think it's a very difficult thing. You've had that government right-sizing bill for quite some time, but alongside it, in the priority of LEDAC, you have new departments to be set up.
Yeah.
If you look at the NEP, there are many positions that are not filled up. I think 1/4 of the non-plantilla of the work done in government.
Ronnie will ask me, I cannot hear you right now.
You cannot? Hello?
We can hear.
Yeah.
We can hear.
We can hear, Ronnie.
1/4 of the jobs in the public sector is filled up with job order and contractual personnel.
Okay.
So it's really, I would say that the most important thing really is go back in terms of creating an information system that allows us to better manage funds and personnel. This was the tragedy under the Aquino administration when the government information management system, GIFMIS, was not in any way passed, and the public finance reform was also not passed during that time. Hopefully that will get passed now.
Certainly a need for better interoperability. Toti, your last words on this issue, and we're wrapping up.
I think that I think we have to look at the problem of bureaucratic inefficiency in a more, in a bigger picture. And I think the reason why we have bureaucratic inefficiency is because it serves the interests of the rent capitalists. When you have a lot of your oligarchy under regulated industries or their monopolies, it is in their interest to have a weak and dysfunctional bureaucracy. So in order to solve this problem, I think we need to change our economic model. And I've always pointed this out, the countries with the best bureaucracies are export-oriented because their companies are subjected to international competition. Their governments have to be efficient, effective, if they are to conquer world markets. So you name it, you have Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore. They're all export-oriented, and therefore they have to have strong bureaucracies. We are navel gazing. Only 30% of our exports, of our GDPs are into exports. So we are inward looking. Most of our industries are dominated by monopolies and oligopolies, and therefore, unless we change the economic model, we will not see a change in the bureaucracy.
Okay, so perhaps really the need for greater engagement on those issues moving forward. Toti, let me now call on Saisa.
Yeah, I think with respect to the reforms that the current administration want to pursue in terms of improving efficiency of the bureaucracy, I honestly don't think right sizing will solve the problems. To me, it seems like um, a misdiagnosis of what the problem really is. It's not so much that governments are unable to spend because of less technology. It's actually because of less technical capacity. And that's because for the longest time, it began during the Asian financial crisis when we started shrinking the bureaucracy and spending less on developing the human capacity of government, human resource development capacity of government. And so the problem is largely the absorptive capacity of many government agencies in terms of procurement. Simple things like writing up tech specs, conducting the biddings, even things like coming up with plans. I think there's a huge structural problem there that technology cannot solve. And even if the administration manages to roll out reforms, ICT reforms, I mean, that's good. That can improve their services that citizens have access to. Like, for example, getting faster birth certificates, having your passports efficiently renewed, but it's not going to solve things like cash transfers. It's not going to solve the problem of low capacity of the public works and the transportation department in terms of designing and contracting out the projects that they need to implement. And that's one of the reasons why it takes a long time. And that's a huge challenge because the administration said it's going to spend a lot on infrastructure, and unless we fix those issues related to procurement and rolling out projects, we will keep seeing less than 50% spending of DPWH and DOTR. And the problem is what's counted in our GDP are actual cash payments. But how can they pay in cash if they cannot in the first place procure and implement more efficiently? So to me, I think the right sizing program will actually derail the implementation of many programs because right sizing is so difficult to do. It's a lot more complicated, and frankly speaking, not even the DBM has the capacity to right size and review everything. So even if Congress, for example, passes that bill, I don't think this administration can implement that within its term. So there.
Thank you, Saisa. Coco, your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Kiko. Yeah, obviously there are very, very many issues. We've just run through a few of them, whether it's digitalization or right sizing or getting disbursements out or legislation. Maybe I'll end by saying I would add one more missed opportunity to Toti's list, which is the president hasn't provided really a strong vision or goal for the country. Everybody who has to work on these various issues that we've all mentioned, including the economic targets that were mentioned in the SONA. Everyone who's working on these issues needs a motivation to do all of these things. Not just, I was told to do this and I'll do it. Do I believe in it or not? The president was able during the campaign to use the word unity as his slogan and the fuel for his campaign. One would wish that he and his advisors could come up with something similar for the nation, so that everybody working on these various issues that we're talking about will be motivated to work towards that. I mean, one country after another is passing us by, and among our neighbors. And my favorite example these days is Indonesia. In 10 years, they've turned it around. one president, 10 years. I'm not saying we want this president to be there for 10 years, but one president can turn it around if he's able to unite the country around the vision. And we have no more excuse. We used to say Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, they're smaller than us, they're part of the mainland, etc. Indonesia is bigger than us. They're a bigger archipelago than us. They were poorer than us. Why were they able to do it? Because they had one leader who managed to do it. And hopefully this leader can do something similar for us. Thanks very much.
Okay, Toti, may parting words si Toti.
Oh, parting words?
Yes.
Yeah, well, as you know, I wrote an analysis of the campaign of President Marcos, saying that the public is really voted right. It's really a continuation of the Duterte policies. No, so hopefully we live up to those expectations, as Coco said, in that. We will probably meet again after 1 year to assess his presidency. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panel. This has been a very fascinating discussion. I wish we have more time, but unfortunately, we have to wrap up. Thank you again to Dr. Ronnie Holmes, Toti Sikyamko, Saisa Sosara, and Coco Alcuas. Thank you very much for the opportunity to moderate this panel, Dindo.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Have a good weekend.
Wala tayong photo
Thank
op,
you.
wala tayong photo op.
Meron, Toti.
Photo
They were
opera.
able to, without you guys knowing it.
Ingat. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.